The sky above Stone Valley burned orange the night the fire came. Ben Carter stood at the fence line of the Double J Ranch, watching flames race across the canyon like demons with appetite and no mercy. The wind pushed the fire forward in waves, consuming dry grass and juniper trees, turning 40 years of his life to ash. He was 63 years old, and everything he knew was dying in front of him. Behind him, the main house still stood, protected by the firebreak Mr. Henderson had cut 2 summers ago when the drought first started showing its teeth. But the barn, the massive structure that had housed 20 horses and held feed for the winter, was gone. Just a skeleton of black beams pointing at the smoke-choked sky like accusing fingers. The fences were twisted metal and charred posts. The pastures were moonscapes of gray powder. Ben had worked this ranch since he was 23 years old. 40 years of early mornings and late nights, of mending fences and breaking horses, of winters so cold his fingers went numb in his gloves and summers so hot the air shimmered like water. He'd never married, never had children, never wanted anything except this: the work, the land, the horses. Now it was gone. Mr. Henderson appeared beside him, his face streaked with soot, his eyes red from smoke. The ranch owner was a practical man, always had been. He ran the Double J like a business because that's what it was. Sentiment didn't pay bills or feed livestock. "We'll assess the damage at first light," Henderson said, his voice hoarse. "Insurance will cover some of it. Maybe we rebuild. Maybe we sell. I don't know yet." Ben nodded. Words felt useless. They waited through the night while the fire department contained the blaze, while helicopters dropped water and foam, while the flames finally died to embers and then to nothing. When dawn broke gray and terrible over Stone Valley, Ben and Henderson walked through what remained. The barn was a total loss. The equipment shed, gone. 3 sections of fencing, destroyed. And the horses. They found most of them in the far pasture, where they'd run when the fire started. 12 had made it, 8 hadn't. Ben counted the bodies and felt something crack inside his chest that wouldn't heal with time or work or whiskey. Near the ruins of the stable, Henderson stopped. "There's nothing left here. Let's check the south field." But Ben heard something, faint, barely there, a sound like breathing through water. "Wait." He moved toward a collapsed section of tin roofing that had fallen when the stable's support beams gave way. The metal was still warm, radiating heat from yesterday's inferno. Ben grabbed it with his gloved hands and heaved it aside. Underneath, in a pocket of space that had somehow protected it from the worst of the flames, lay a foal. It was a tiny spark of life in a graveyard of ash. But before we see if Ben can actually save him, if you love emotional stories about resilience and hope, make sure to subscribe and hit that bell icon so you don't miss an upload. Now, let's see what condition the foal was in. The little horse was maybe 3 months old, no bigger than a large dog. Its coat, what remained of it, was burned in patches, revealing raw pink skin beneath. One ear was singed short. Its legs were covered in blisters. It lay on its side in the ash, breathing in shallow, wheezing gasps. But its eyes were open. Those eyes looked at Ben, and in them he saw something he recognized. Not resignation, not surrender, a spark, a refusal. The same look he'd seen in the mirror every morning for 40 years when his body ached and his joints screamed, and he got up anyway because the work didn't do itself. The foal wanted to live. Henderson came over, saw what Ben had found, and shook his head. "Poor thing, must have been trapped when the roof came down. I'm surprised it lasted this long." "It's alive!" "Barely." Henderson pulled a rifle from where he'd propped it against a fence post earlier. "The merciful thing is to put it out of its misery. It's burned too bad. Even if it survives, it'll be crippled, useless, no quality of life." The rifle came up. Henderson was already moving his finger to the safety. Ben's hand shot out and wrapped around the barrel, pushing it down toward the ground. "Don't!" Henderson looked at him with surprise. Ben rarely spoke up, rarely questioned, rarely did anything except work and nod and follow orders. "Ben, be reasonable. Look at it. Those burns go deep. The pain it's in. I know pain." Ben's voice was quiet but carried weight. "I've seen pain. This foal's in pain, yeah, but it's not giving up. Look at its eyes." Henderson looked. The foal's dark eyes stared back at them, unblinking, refusing to close. "It wants to fight," Ben said, "so let it fight. The vet bills alone would be thousands. And for what? A scarred horse nobody will buy?" "I'll buy it." Henderson blinked. "What?" "I'll buy the foal. Whatever you think it's worth in this condition, I'll pay it. And I'll take full responsibility. You won't lose a dime on it." Henderson studied Ben's face for a long moment. Then he sighed. "You know I can't afford to keep you on after this. The ranch is finished. Even if we rebuild, I'll have to sell half the land to pay for it. There won't be jobs for ranch hands anymore." Ben had known this was coming, still hurt to hear it said out loud. "I know. Your severance is $2,000, 40 years of service. It's all I can do. I'll take $1,500 of that severance and give it to you right now for the foal, and whatever medical supplies you've got left." Henderson looked at the burned foal, then at Ben, then back at the foal. Finally he nodded. "Deal. God help you, Ben. You're taking on heartbreak." "Already got plenty of that. One more won't make much difference." They shook hands. Henderson gave Ben what remained of the first aid supplies: burn cream, bandages, antiseptic, a few syringes of antibiotics meant for cattle, but that might work on a horse if you adjusted the dosage. Ben fashioned a travois from 2 fence posts and a tarp, the way his grandfather had taught him 60 years ago. He carefully lifted the foal onto it, and the little horse barely reacted, too exhausted to fight. Then Ben began the long walk back to his cabin. The cabin sat 5 miles from the ranch, down a dirt road that turned to mud when it rained and washboard when it didn't. Ben had rented it for $300 a month for the past 15 years. 1 room, wood stove. No running water except the pump outside. It wasn't much, but it was his. He pulled the travois all 5 miles, his shoulders burning, his back screaming, his boots raising dust with each step. The foal lay still, breathing shallow, slipping in and out of consciousness. Twice Ben stopped to check if it was still alive, pressing his ear to its chest to hear the faint thump of heartbeat. At the cabin, Ben converted his small storage shed into a stable. He laid down fresh straw he'd been saving for winter, hung a heat lamp from the ceiling, filled buckets with water from the pump. Then he carried the foal inside and laid it down gently. "All right, little one," Ben said, kneeling beside it. "We've got a long road ahead, but if you're willing to walk it, so am I." The foal's eye opened and looked at him, and Ben began the work. The first week was hell. Ben barely slept. Every 2 hours he had to clean the foal's burns, apply the cream that made the little horse flinch and whimper, change bandages that came away stained with fluid and blood. He had to force-feed milk replacer through a bottle, holding the foal's head in his lap, coaxing it to swallow when every instinct told it to give up. The foal developed a fever on day 3. Ben spent the entire night with cold compresses, bringing the temperature down, degree by agonizing degree, whispering promises he wasn't sure he could keep. "You're going to make it. You're strong, stronger than you know." On day 5, the foal stood for the first time. Its legs shook. It fell immediately, but it tried again, and again. On the 7th attempt, it stayed upright for 10 seconds before collapsing back into the straw. Ben named it Smoke, for the fire that should have killed it but didn't, for the color of the dawn after the worst night of both their lives. The burns began to heal, but they left scars. Patches where hair would never grow back, skin that stayed pink and tender, one ear that would always be shorter than the other. Smoke looked like something assembled from spare parts, mismatched and broken. In town, at the feed store, people stared. "That's the burned horse," they whispered. "Waste of money," said Tom Brewster, who owned the neighboring ranch. "Ben's always been odd, but this is something else. That animal will never be worth anything." "Shoulda let it die," agreed Helen Cross, who sold tack and supplies. "Kinder that way." Ben heard them, but didn't respond. He bought his supplies and left. At home, Smoke was changing. As the weeks turned into months, the foal's personality emerged. It followed Ben everywhere, trailing behind him like a dog, whinnying when Ben went inside the cabin and closed the door. It learned to open the gate latch with its mouth, which meant Ben had to buy better locks. It would steal his hat and run circles around the small paddock Ben had built, playing keep-away. Despite everything, despite the scars and the pain, Smoke had joy. Winter came to Stone Valley, cold winds swept down from the mountains, bringing snow that covered the burned grasslands in white, hiding the evidence of the fire beneath a clean sheet. Ben used the last of his savings to buy feed and to pay the rent. He started taking odd jobs, fixing fences for neighbors, mucking stalls, anything that paid cash. Money was tighter than it had ever been. Some nights, Ben went to bed hungry because the feed for Smoke cost more than his own groceries, but he never regretted the choice. Then, as winter thawed into spring, something strange began to happen. Smoke's coat started growing back, not in the brown or black or bay that Ben expected, but in gold. At first, Ben thought it was a trick of the light, the way the morning sun hit the new hair growth, making it shimmer. But as more grew in, covering the patches and the scars, the truth became undeniable. Smoke's coat was metallic gold, like copper had been melted and spun into hair, like honey and sunlight had been woven into fur. In certain angles, the horse seemed to glow. Ben had worked with horses his entire life. He'd never seen anything like it. The horse grew too. Fast. By the time Smoke turned 1 year old, he was already the size of a 2-year-old. His legs were long and graceful. His neck arched in a curve that spoke of careful breeding. His movements were fluid and powerful. People in town stopped laughing. They started staring for different reasons. "What kind of horse is that?" they asked. "I don't know," Ben admitted. "Found him after the fire, just a foal, near dead." "He's beautiful," they said, and their voices carried notes of envy and wonder. Tom Brewster stopped Ben outside the hardware store one afternoon. "I'll give you $2,000 for that horse." Ben shook his head. "He's not for sale." "3,000, final offer." "Not interested." Brewster's face darkened. "You're a fool, Ben. That horse is wasted on a man with no land and no future. I've got mares. I could breed him, make real money." "Smoke's not a commodity. He's my partner." "Your partner?" Brewster laughed, but it wasn't friendly. "You've lost your mind, old man." Maybe he had. But as Ben walked home, Smoke trotting freely beside him, no rope, no halter, just trust, he didn't feel crazy. He felt more sane than he had in years. The spring brought wildflowers to Stone Valley. They pushed up through the ash, through the burned ground, proving that life didn't stop just because fire tried to erase it. Ben took Smoke on long walks through the hills, letting the young stallion run and buck and explore. During these walks, Ben noticed something else. Smoke was fast, not normal, horse fast, exceptional, the kind of speed that made the wind sound different when the horse passed through it. And Smoke was smart. He learned commands not through repetition, but through understanding. He seemed to anticipate what Ben needed before Ben knew himself. One evening, as they sat together in the paddock watching the sunset, Ben rested his hand on Smoke's neck and felt the powerful muscles beneath the golden coat. "You're something special," he said quietly. "I don't know what, exactly, but something." Smoke turned his head and pressed his muzzle against Ben's chest. And in that moment, Ben understood something he'd been dancing around for months. He hadn't saved Smoke. They'd saved each other. The horse had given Ben a reason to keep going when the ranch job ended and the future looked empty. And Ben had given Smoke the chance to become whatever he was meant to be. The stranger arrived on a Tuesday in early summer. Ben was mending the paddock fence, a never-ending task, when a black SUV pulled up the dirt road and stopped in front of his cabin. The vehicle looked expensive and out of place, like someone had dropped a piece of the city into the middle of nowhere. A man stepped out, mid-50s, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Ben's truck, carrying a leather briefcase. He looked around at the modest cabin, the small paddock, the golden horse grazing nearby, and his eyes went wide. "Excuse me," the man called out. "I'm looking for the owner of that horse." Ben set down his hammer. "That would be me." The stranger approached, his polished shoes getting dusty with each step. He extended his hand. "My name is Dr. Robert Mitchell. I'm a historian and breed specialist with the International Equine Registry. I was driving through Stone Valley on my way to a conference when I saw your horse from the road. I had to stop. May I ask what breed he is?" Ben shook the offered hand. "Honestly, I don't know. Found him as a foal after the ranch fire last year. He was near dead, nursed him back." "The fire at the Double J Ranch?" "That's the one." Dr. Mitchell moved closer to the paddock fence, his eyes never leaving Smoke. The horse had noticed the stranger and was watching him with alert but calm attention. "May I approach him?" "He's gentle enough, but he decides who he trusts." The doctor slowly entered the paddock. Smoke didn't back away, but he didn't approach either. They studied each other for a long moment. Then Dr. Mitchell did something that surprised Ben. He bowed slightly, a gesture of respect. Smoke stepped forward and allowed the man to touch his neck. "Extraordinary," Dr. Mitchell breathed. The metallic sheen, the bone structure, the proportions. He ran his hands down Smoke's legs, examining the hooves, the cannon bones, the way the shoulder connected to the body. "Sir, do you know what you have here?" "A horse that wouldn't quit," Ben said. "That, yes, but also something incredibly rare. This animal is an achal teki." The name meant nothing to Ben. "A what?" Dr. Mitchell turned, his face animated with excitement. The achal teke, also called the golden horse. They're an ancient breed from Turkmenistan, developed over 3,000 years ago. They're known for that metallic coat, caused by a unique structure in the hair follicles that reflects light. They were the horses of royalty, of conquerors. Genghis Khan rode an achal teke. Alexander the Great's Bucephalus was believed to be one. Ben looked at Smoke with new eyes. "You're saying Smoke is some kind of royal horse?" "I'm saying he's extremely rare. There are only about 6,000 achal tekes in the entire world, and I've spent 20 years studying them. I've never seen one with this pure gold coloring. He's exceptional even among exceptions." "But how did he end up here? At a ranch in Stone Valley?" Dr. Mitchell pulled out his phone and started tapping. "You said the Double J Ranch. Let me check something." He scrolled through screens, reading. His eyebrows rose. "Ah, that explains it. There was a private breeding facility on the property adjacent to the Double J. It was owned by a collector named Marcus Thornton. He was trying to revive rare bloodlines. Very secretive operation. Very exclusive. He died 2 years ago, and his estate went into probate. The breeding barn was abandoned." "I never knew there was a breeding barn over there," Ben said. "It was deliberately hidden. Thornton was paranoid about theft. These horses can be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. When the fire swept through, it must have burned the facility. Your foal probably escaped through a broken fence or door and made it to the Double J's property." Ben felt something cold settle in his stomach. "So he has owners, someone looking for him." "Had owners. Thornton's estate is still in legal limbo. His heirs are fighting over everything. The horses were supposed to be auctioned off, but the fire complicated matters. Most of Thornton's breeding stock was killed. The few that survived were sold off quickly to settle debts. But this one," Dr. Mitchell gestured to Smoke, "this one was never accounted for. He was presumed dead." "What does that mean?" "It means legally he's yours. You found him. You saved him. You've cared for him. No one has a stronger claim." Dr. Mitchell paused, and his expression shifted from academic excitement to something more calculated. "Which brings me to why I really stopped. I'm sorry, I didn't get your name." Ben Carter." "Mr. Carter, I'd like to make you an offer. There's a breeder in Kentucky who's been looking for an achal teke stallion to improve his bloodlines. He's already agreed to pay a substantial sum for the right animal. I believe your horse is exactly what he needs." Dr. Mitchell opened his briefcase and pulled out a document. "I'm prepared to offer you $250,000 for him." The number hung in the air like something impossible. Ben's mind reeled. $250,000. He could buy land, build a real stable, live comfortably for the first time in his life. No more odd jobs, no more scraping by, no more going to bed hungry. He looked at his truck, rusted and barely running, at his cabin, which leaked when it rained, at his boots, which had been resoled 3 times because he couldn't afford new ones. Then he looked at Smoke. The golden stallion was watching him, not with need or desperation, just watching, trusting. The way he'd looked at Ben from under that collapsed roof 18 months ago, when everything had been pain and darkness, but the spark refused to die. Ben thought about the nights spent caring for wounds, the hours of feeding and cleaning and worrying, the way Smoke followed him around like a shadow, the way the horse would rest his head on Ben's shoulder when they sat together in the evening, the absolute loyalty and love that had grown between them, forged in fire and strengthened through time. Some things couldn't be measured in money. "Dr. Mitchell," Ben said slowly, "I appreciate the offer. I really do. But Smoke's not for sale." The doctor blinked. Mr. Carter, perhaps you didn't understand. 250,000. I understood just fine. The answer's still no. Be reasonable. What can you offer this animal? A small paddock? Basic feed? He's a champion quality horse. He could sire champions. He could live in luxury, have access to the finest care. He could also live here, Ben said, his voice firm, with someone who loves him, who sees him as more than dollar signs or breeding stock. Who knows what it took for him to survive? He moved to the fence and Smoke immediately came over, pressing his head against Ben's chest. This horse saved my life as much as I saved his. When I lost everything, he gave me something to care about, something to wake up for. You can't put a price on that. Dr. Mitchell studied them both for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, he smiled. I understand. I've been working with horses my entire life. The bond between human and animal, it's rare, it's precious. And you're right, it's not something you can buy or sell. He put the document back in his briefcase. If you ever change your mind, here's my card. But I hope you don't. The world needs more men like you, Mr. Carter. Men who understand that value and worth aren't always the same thing. They shook hands. Dr. Mitchell drove away, his black SUV disappearing down the dirt road in a cloud of dust. Ben stood at the fence with Smoke. The stallion nuzzled his shoulder, leaving streaks of golden hair on Ben's worn shirt. Looks like you're worth $250,000, Ben said quietly. But I already knew you were priceless. The sun was setting over Stone Valley, painting the burned hills in shades of amber and rose. New grass had grown over the blackened earth. Wildflowers dotted the landscape in purple and yellow. The scar of the fire was still visible, but life had returned. Ben thought about the ranch, about Mr. Henderson who'd sold the land and moved to Arizona, about the barn that was never rebuilt, about the 40 years he'd spent working for someone else's dream. He didn't have a ranch anymore, didn't have steady work, didn't have much money or security or any of the things practical people would say he needed. But he had this, a small cabin, a golden horse, and a purpose that had nothing to do with profit and everything to do with the promise he'd made to a dying foal that refused to die. Smoke whinnied softly, a sound like wind through grass. You hungry? Ben asked. The horse nodded, actually nodded, in a way that made Ben laugh. All right then, let's get you fed. They walked together toward the storage shed where Ben kept the hay and feed. Smoke walked without a lead rope, staying close to Ben's side. Equal partners, not master and animal, but two survivors who'd found each other in the aftermath of disaster. The evening star appeared in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. The air smelled like sage and dust and possibilities. Ben filled Smoke's trough and stood watching the stallion eat. The golden coat caught the last rays of sunlight, making the horse look like something from a legend, a creature that belonged in ancient stories about heroes and kingdoms, and the bonds that transcended ordinary understanding. Maybe that's what Smoke was, a legend that had walked out of fire into Ben's life. Or maybe, and this felt truer, maybe they were both just broken things that had found each other and decided that being broken together was better than being whole and alone. Ben rested his hand on Smoke's neck, feeling the warmth of muscle and blood and life. The pulse beneath his palm was strong and steady, beating in rhythm with his own heart. We did all right, he said softly. Didn't we, boy? The weeks following Dr. Mitchell's visit brought an unexpected change to Ben's quiet life. Word spread through Stone Valley about the golden horse, about the offer Ben had turned down, about the $250,000 he'd refused because love mattered more than money. The story traveled the way stories do in small towns, at the feed store, at the diner, in church parking lots where people gathered after Sunday services. Some thought Ben was noble, others thought he was a fool. But something shifted in how people looked at him. The ranch hands who'd watched him lose everything in the fire, who'd seen him walk away from the Double J with nothing but severance pay and a dying foal, now saw him differently. Not as a man who'd failed to hold on to security, but as someone who'd chosen something harder and more valuable. The local farrier, a weathered man named Pete Donovan, who'd known Ben for 30 years, stopped by one evening unannounced. He climbed out of his truck carrying his tools and approached the paddock where Smoke was grazing. Heard you've been trimming those hooves yourself, Pete said by way of greeting. Can't afford professional work, Ben replied, leaning against the fence. Didn't ask if you could afford it. Asked if you needed it done right. Pete opened the gate. That horse is special, deserves the best care, so I'm here to provide it. No charge. Consider it my way of saying I respect what you did. Choosing hard over money. Ben felt his throat tighten. Pete, I can't accept. You can and you will. I've got more work than I can handle anyway. Taking care of one extraordinary horse isn't going to break me. Pete approached Smoke, who watched him with calm curiosity. Besides, word is this fellow's got royal blood. Can't have a prince walking around on neglected feet. They worked together in comfortable silence, Pete demonstrating proper techniques, explaining how Ajal Teques had different hoof structures than regular horses, required specific angles and attention. Smoke stood patiently through it all, occasionally turning his head to watch Ben, making sure his person was still there. He trusts you completely, Pete observed, setting down Smoke's hoof. I've worked with hundreds of horses, Ben. Thousands, probably. But I've never seen a bond like this. It's like he knows you saved him, like he's decided you're his purpose as much as he's yours. After Pete left, Ben stood in the paddock with Smoke, watching the sun descend toward the western hills. He thought about the visits that had come in recent weeks, not just Pete, but others. Nancy Chen from the feed store had started giving him a regular customer discount that Ben suspected she'd invented specifically for him, knocking 20% off his bills. The veterinarian from 2 towns over had stopped by to check Smoke's old burn scars, refusing payment, saying that sometimes animals remind us why we chose this work in the first place. Even Tom Brewster, who'd called Ben a fool for keeping Smoke, had grudgingly left a message at the general store saying he had surplus hay he couldn't store, and Ben could have it if he came to collect it. When Ben had driven over to pick it up, Brewster had helped him load 3 times what could reasonably be called surplus, never once acknowledging that this was charity disguised as convenience. The community was taking care of Ben in small, quiet ways, not because they pitied him, but because his choice had reminded them of something they'd forgotten in the practical grind of ranch economics and survival, that some things mattered beyond profit margins. That loyalty and love weren't weaknesses to be mocked, but strengths to be honored. Ben sat on the fence rail, and Smoke came to stand beside him, the horse's warmth radiating in the cooling evening air. You know what I've learned? Ben said quietly, scratching behind Smoke's remaining full ear. I spent 40 years working for Mr. Henderson, building his dream, making his ranch successful. And I was proud of that work, but it was always his, never mine. I was always just the hired hand. Smoke's ear swiveled toward his voice, listening. But you're mine, not in the ownership way, like property, in the family way, the way that matters. Ben's voice caught slightly. When that doctor offered me more money than I'd make in 5 years of ranch work, I realized something. I've been poor my whole life. I'll probably die poor. But being poor with you is richer than being wealthy without you, because we chose each other. And that choice is worth more than anything someone could pay me. The golden horse pressed his head against Ben's shoulder, and the gesture was so full of understanding, so perfectly timed, that Ben could almost believe Smoke comprehended every word. A truck appeared on the dirt road, moving slowly, trailing dust. Ben recognized it as belonging to old Joe Martinez, who ran a small spread on the eastern edge of the valley. Joe was in his 70s, had been ranching since before Ben was born, and rarely socialized beyond necessary business. Joe pulled up and climbed out stiffly, walking over to the fence. He stood there for a moment, studying Smoke, then looked at Ben. "Heard what you did," Joe said, his voice gravelly with age and weather. "Turning down that money." Ben nodded, unsure where this was going. "My grandson's coming to stay with me next month," Joe continued. "Boy from the city. His mother, my daughter, thinks ranch life might straighten him out, give him purpose." Joe paused. "I was wondering if you'd let the boy come visit your horse sometimes. Let him help with the care. He needs to learn what you know." "What's that?" "That the best things in life aren't the things you can buy or sell. They're the things you refuse to give up, even when it costs you everything to keep them." Joe met Ben's eyes. "That's a lesson worth more than any school can teach." Ben felt something warm spread through his chest. "He's welcome anytime. Smoke could use the extra attention, and I could probably use the help." Joe nodded, shook Ben's hand with a grip that was still strong despite arthritis, and drove away. Darkness fell completely. the stars emerging in their thousands, the Milky Way visible in ways it never was in cities, painting the sky in silver and wonder. Ben climbed down from the fence and walked toward his cabin, Smoke following unbidden, unwilling to let distance separate them, even for the length of a night. At the cabin door, Ben turned and looked at his companion. The golden coat seemed to hold light, to glow with its own illumination against the darkness. "Tomorrow, we'll check the fence line. Maybe take a long walk up to the ridge. Would you like that?" Smoke nickered softly, a sound of contentment and agreement. "Good. Then it's settled." Ben paused, his hand on the door. "Thank you, Smoke, for choosing me back, for making an old cowboy's last years mean something, for teaching me that sometimes the best way to save your own life is to save someone else's first." The horse took one step closer, and Ben wrapped his arms around that strong neck, pressing his face against the golden coat that smelled of hay and dust and something indefinably sweet. They stood like that for a long moment, man and horse, both survivors, both scarred, both choosing each other daily in ways that transcended words or reason. Finally, Ben released him and watched Smoke walk back to the paddock, the horse's movements fluid and powerful. Every step a declaration that he was alive, he was strong, he was exactly where he chose to be. Inside the cabin, Ben lay in his narrow bed, listening to the sounds of the night, wind through the eaves, distant coyotes, and underneath it all, the soft sounds of Smoke moving in his paddock, alive and well and safe. Ben closed his eyes and smiled in the darkness, knowing that tomorrow would bring the same challenges. Not enough money, too much work, an uncertain future. But it would also bring the same gift, another day with a golden horse who'd walked out of fire into his life and transformed everything, not by being valuable to others, but by being invaluable to him. Smoke lifted his head from the trough and looked at Ben with those dark, intelligent eyes. And in them, Ben saw the same thing he'd seen 18 months ago under a collapsed roof in the ashes of a destroyed barn. Not just the will to survive, but the will to live, to thrive, to prove that what looks worthless to others might be priceless to those who bother to see. The stars came out one by one, filling the sky with light. And in a small paddock outside a modest cabin in Stone Valley, a poor cowboy and a golden horse stood together in the darkness, both of them proof that some fires don't destroy. Some fires forge